Stop. On this play, North Carolina is led by their star freshman quarterback Sam Howell, and if they can execute, they will likely take down Clemson. Why is this so important, you may ask? Well, this North Carolina team reminded me a lot of the early Dabo Swinney Clemson teams, and it definitely would have been one of the biggest upsets of the year in college football as well. Going back, Dabo was not seen as the perfect hire, and no one ever thought he could take Clemson football into blue blood stratosphere, but around a decade later, his Tigers are desperately trying to hold off the Tar Heels in what was supposed to be an easy ACC game. Clemson is now recognized as a blue blood program, but it wasn't always that way, and although North Carolina lost that game in 2019, it reminds me a lot of those early Clemson teams, and in today's video we will learn why I say that and why that game could be so significant for the future. Typically, we see historic blue blood turn from a prestigious program into dead programs. For example, Nebraska, Tennessee, Texas, Miami, and Georgia Tech. I could name more if you want, but rarely do we ever see a school become a blue blood. Clemson is the perfect example of a school that went from very good to elite. But with what's brewing in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, is there a chance that North Carolina football under Mack Brown could become the next big program and become a blue blood in the future? We'll talk about that today. I do see a lot of similarities between the two programs, and in today's video we will talk about why I think that the Mack Brown effect, the rise of North Carolina football, and why they have the potential to become a blue blood in the future. But first, if you want to support what I'm doing here on YouTube, please be sure to give the video a like, subscribe if you love college football, and suggest another topic, coach, or program I should do next, and also be sure to turn on post notifications so you never miss when I upload. Now let's go ahead and get started and talk about the rise of North Carolina football. I want to quickly talk about the history of UNC football before Mack Brown arrived, and we will talk about the first Mack Brown era that happened a while ago. The Tar Heels have had 3 Hall of Fame coaches in their time, with Mack Brown, Jim Tatum, and Carl Snavely all getting honored with the highest level of prestige being put in the Hall of Fame. Mack Brown has coached the most games and is the most well-known of the 3, but his greatest achievements were at Texas, where he helped Texas become a title contender, and then he retired after a losing year in 2010. He went into retirement, and I think a lot of people assumed he would never coach again, but they were wrong. But before I talk about his return to North Carolina and what he's building, we need to understand what Mack Brown did in his first stint in North Carolina and what they were like going into it. His first head coaching gig was at Appalachian State, and then he spent time as the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma and eventually the head coach at Tulane before he took the North Carolina job. It was not all sunshine and rainbows at first though, as he went 1-10 in both of his first 2 seasons, and that was the worst stretch in modern Tar Heel football history, but you had to give him some time. So many good coaches are run out of town for not producing immediately, and in year 3, Mack had them exactly where they needed to be. In 1990, they went 6-4-1, and the tie came against Georgia Tech, who ended up becoming the national champion that year. For the next 7 seasons, North Carolina was consistently relevant, went to bowl games, and sold out their home stadium every Saturday. Mack Brown was a great coach and would then take the Texas job in 1997. After that, Carl Torbush took over a few years later before he was fired, then John Bunting took over before he was fired, and then they hired legendary head coach Butch Davis, who would throw the program into scandal and an NCAA investigation. From there, they had an interim guy before they hired one of the up-and-coming young coaches in college football in Southern Miss head coach Larry Fedora. He was a solid coach and even had them in the ACC championship game in 2015, but after a few tough years, combined with his poor relationship with the media, he was fired and they needed a new coach. I actually made a documentary about the rise and fall of Larry Fedora, so please be sure to check that out in the comment section. Without really knowing where to turn, they called up an old legend to coach there, and the rest is history. Mack Brown was hired. On November 27, 2018, Mack Brown was named the head coach at North Carolina after a 5-year absence from coaching and 21 years after he left North Carolina for Texas. Many thought he retired early, and it stemmed from the Longhorns' title loss to Alabama in 2009. He said, quote, "This is a game, you're supposed to enjoy it, and I'm afraid a lot of the years I had, I was fighting that." Coach Darrell Royal told me something at Texas. He quit coaching at 52, and I asked him, "Why'd you quit at 52? He said because the wins became a relief and the losses became devastation. After he retired, he spent 5 years working as a college football analyst for ESPN, and he spent those 5 years meeting with college coaches before calling a game, scouting hours of film, watching practices, and studying up on new young coaches make an impact. His time away from the game really allowed him to rediscover his love for coaching and college football. With a rejuvenated perspective, he came up with a new plan to build a team and a staff. After visiting schools, calling games, and seeing the support he had, he was ready to coach again, and it was an offer he couldn't refuse to go back to North Carolina. Some questioned this hire as he was seen as washed up, out of touch with modern football, and UNC was in a tough spot. But no worries for Brown though, as he knew what he was doing, and the first thing he did was assemble a staff full of guys who were innovators, guys who had fun, and guys who could help him build an air raid offense with an effective run game. Then he needed to find a quarterback, and luckily for him, there was a guy from Charlotte who was wanted by the likes of Alabama and Clemson. His name was Sam Howell, and at the time, he committed to Florida State, but when Fedora was fired, there was a curveball. He told Knowles 24/7, quote, "I'm coming to Florida State unless something dramatic happens." Something very dramatic did happen, as we all know Mack was hired, and all of a sudden, there was a lot of momentum towards the heels. Brown had been out of the coaching ranks for 5 years. I found a segment from an article that was pretty interesting that said, quote, "Brown had been out of the coaching ranks for 5 years, and the UNC transition happened so quickly that he did not have time to build a recruiting list by the time he arrived in Chapel Hill. His stepson Chris, who is a recruiting diehard, made a plea on his first day on the job, quote, 'You better get to Charlotte, that guy's really good.'" He was talking about Sam Howell. He did that. Sam Howell wanted there to be an offensive coordinator, and on December 11th, Phil Longo was hired, and his vision for an air raid passing attack powered with a run game was going to happen. Howell flipped from Florida State to North Carolina, and it was an immediate warning to Power 5 competition that North Carolina's borders for top talent were going to be secured and hard to get kids from. It was very important to keep North Carolina kids home, and that was something that Fedora didn't do a good job of. He said, quote, "We had some good quarterbacks here, but when I watched Sam, he was just so special, and I saw what we're seeing now, that was it." And he also was a huge name in the state that was a great player, so for us to get accomplished what we needed to get accomplished, we wanted to go back to work and start dominating our state in recruiting. We thought he was key for that because if he came, then some other guys would consider coming. Eventually, Emory Simmons flipped from Penn State, and after that, a number of other guys did as well. Sam Howell was very important to them for a lot of reasons. He now had a big-time quarterback committed like a lot of new coaches get, but what about the rest of the team? He landed a class that was ranked 30th in the country, including 4 four-star commits and 3 transfers from Power 5 programs. He returned talented players such as Michael Carter and Javonte Williams at running back, plus 2 eventual 1,000-yard receivers in Daz Newsome and De'Ami Brown, and you also can't forget former quarterback turned defensive star Chaz Surratt. The Heels were picked to finish 6th in the country, and Howell beat out both Jace Ruder and Cade Fortin for the starting job, and they opened up against South Carolina. They won the game in thrilling fashion, and Mack set the tone that North Carolina football didn't need to rebuild to compete. Plus, South Carolina was actually the first team that Mack coached against when he started back in the 80s. The following week, they won a really fun game against Miami, and they were off to a 2-0 start now. They lost their first game of the year on the road to Wake Forest before a matchup with the school he had started out as a head coach at, Appalachian State. App State was one of the best group of 5 schools in 2019, and they go on to block a late North Carolina field goal and upset the Heels. At the time, Elijah Drinkwitz was the head coach of the Mountaineers, and he's now the head coach for my Missouri Tigers, and App State also beat South Carolina in 2019 too. They were now 2-2 for a home matchup with number 1 Clemson, and after a really good game, the Heels would score, but Mack Brown elected to go for 2 in the win instead of going to overtime. Sam Howell got stuffed on a designed run, and Clemson won, but this was a huge moment as Mack Brown's work was on full display on a national stage, and Sam Howell was a young star quarterback. They beat Georgia Tech the following week before they lost in 6 overtimes to Virginia Tech on the road. This was a ridiculous game that isn't talked about enough, but all 4 of the team's losses to this point were by 1 possession, and I bet that was a tough pill to swallow. They rebounded with a 3-point win over Duke before 2 more close losses to Virginia and Pittsburgh in overtime. Thankfully, they had some better luck to end the year as they beat Mercer and NC State, and they were to go bowling. They were matched up with Temple in the Military Bowl, and the Owls were no match for the Heels as they killed them, and they found a ton of momentum by the end of the year. Because every loss was by 1 possession, the Heels had a ton of hype going into 2020, and combining that with 10 plus 4-star recruits in the 13th best class in the nation, they started out ranked number 18 in the initial AP poll. Sadly, college football got all messed up this year, as we all know, so we missed out on non-conference games with Auburn and UCF as they would get canceled. They obliterated Syracuse in their first game and got a test from Boston College in week 2, but after a win over number 19 Virginia Tech, they were up to number 5 in the country against a Florida State team that had been struggling. In what was a really weird game, Florida State built a big lead and looked to be in complete control before Sam Howell led a late comeback and almost saved the Heels, but a bunch of drop passes would end up losing them the game, and this was a reminder that North Carolina football was not quite there yet. They rebounded with a win over number 23 NC State, but they showed weakness again as they lost to a bad Virginia team by 3. They beat both Duke and Wake Forest, but they had a huge matchup with Notre Dame, and ACC championship title chances were on the line. They lost by 2 scores to the Fighting Irish, and this was once again another reminder that they were not quite there yet with the Blue Bloods. Against a vastly overrated number 10 Miami Hurricanes team, UNC put on a historic performance as they ran all over the Canes for over 500 plus yards rushing, and the Canes were flustered the entire time, and this was actually pathetic. They went 8-3 and were the 3rd best team in the ACC, but they wouldn't get to show it in their bowl game as they had a ton of NFL guys opt out, and they at least still showed up and almost beat number 5 Texas A&M in the Orange Bowl. There will be star players to replace for the 2021 season, but there are national title hopes for the Tar Heels, and expectations are soaring after another loaded recruiting class that is ranked 14th in the nation. And with Sam Howell and some of the talented guys they have on this team, I know they're going to show up, compete, and be really good. So now I bet you're asking why I think they're similar to Clemson and why I think North Carolina could become a blue blood in the near future. Well, the Heels may actually be ahead of Clemson a bit, as in 2009, Dabo's first full year, they went 9-5, which is pretty similar to North Carolina's first year, and then in their second year under Dabo, they went 6-7, and I blame it all on the fact they really didn't have consistent quarterback play back then, as Kyle Parker just wasn't anything special. It wasn't until 2011 that Clemson really got their first star quarterback under Dabo, and that was 5-star recruit Tajh Boyd, and I think he's a very similar situation to Sam Howell. I'm definitely not saying they're the same player by any means, but they're both guys who were actually big-time quarterbacks and were stars. The Tigers started to win more games, they brought in consistent recruiting classes, and had a star quarterback at the helm. If you remember, the second real big-time quarterback Dabo landed was 5-star recruit Deshaun Watson, who was wanted by every school in the nation and brought the Tigers a ton of success. But Scott, you may be asking, the Heels don't have a Deshaun Watson committed to their team. Actually, they do. Drake May was a 5-star recruit for quite a while and was actually originally committed to Nick Saban in Alabama, but he flipped his commitment to North Carolina and Mack Brown, and I think he has the potential to be a step better than Howell was, and the bar is super high. And yes, he also is the younger brother of former basketball player Luke May. I don't have a ton of games and seasons to compare the Heels and Tigers to, as we're only year 3 under Mack, but Dabo built the Tigers into a contender with a good culture, big-time quarterback recruits, loaded recruiting classes, and innovative schemes. Plus, the ACC was a little bit down then. The Heels have real playoff hype this year, a genius coach, innovative schemes, loaded recruiting classes, and a quarterback who could both win the Heisman and be the number 1 overall pick in the 2022 NFL Draft, plus a young quarterback on the roster who could take over the reins after and lead them to new heights and potentially a national title. Combine that with the fact that the ACC has been a joke the last few years, the Heels should be able to out-talent, out-coach, and out-recruit every other school in the conference except Clemson, and who knows, maybe they can close the gap. We don't have a ton of results so far. I'm not saying any of this will happen, but on paper, it looks like there's a chance for this to happen. Florida State is down, Miami is down, Georgia Tech is not the program they used to be either, and Louisville is not seeing the same kind of success that we saw a couple years ago either. The biggest critic to my theory though is that we don't have a ton of results so far. Mack Brown is getting older, and these big time recruits in Drake May could all flop. But from the looks of it, the Tar Heels should be here to stay in the ACC, and I think they can build themselves into a consistent contender and maybe even a blue blood down the road. This will be the year we know, as they have 3 of Brown's recruiting classes, an experienced quarterback, and holes on offense to fill, as most big-time programs, when they lose star players, they refill and reload at those positions, and we'll see if North Carolina has the ability to do that, as they do have a ton of good recruits and a ton of players who can fill those gaps, but let's see if they can actually make it happen. Personally, I can see Mack getting the Heels to a consistent 10-plus win program, and then when he retires, they hire an up-and-coming coach who can take them to the next level, and who is pretty young like Dabo was when he took over Clemson. We do have to remember that Dabo was not seen as a great hire at the time, and he was seen as a huge risk, so we really don't know what's going to happen. All I know is I love the North Carolina football hype train. I've really enjoyed watching them over the last few years. Sam Howell is such a good quarterback. All the guys they have going to the NFL I think will do really well at the next level, and just seeing a school like North Carolina go from an average team to a potential blue blood or a top tier program would be really fascinating and really give a lot of college football fans hope for smaller programs. Unfortunately, college football has been dominated by the Blue Bloods, and it's seemingly all about the college football playoff, and bowls don't even seem to matter anymore. But if a story like North Carolina happens where they go from an average team to a team that can actually get to the playoff, then that'll give hope to all us fans who root for schools that aren't the Alabamas or the Clemsons or the Oklahomas of the world. And this could help the sport even more, and by the time we expand to 8 or 16 teams, we could have a lot more teams being competitive. But we have no idea what's going to happen, and I think it's going to be really fun to see how this all plays out. and the 2021 season will be really big for this. Let me know what your thoughts are. Can Mack Brown build North Carolina into a potential blue blood? How do you think they will do in 2021? And do you think Drake May has the potential to be better than Sam Howell? Also, let me know another coach or program that could have a rise like this, or any other topic or long story documentary style video I should do next. I'm taking all your guys' suggestions. I'm reading everything you guys have to say, and I really want to make more videos like this, so please be sure to let me know. And if you love this kind of content, please be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts so the video can get in the algorithm and more people can see it. If you're still here, check out all my other videos just like this. And I did a video about Matt Campbell building a monster at Iowa State, and you guys should check that out as it's on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time,